This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Confessions podcast, one in which I magically reappear from my holidays just to be with you right at this moment.
And how is the Five Live cruise going?
Well, it's quite good, and I got the Five Live helicopter to bring me back over just so I can take part in this special moment.
Very good of you. I thought there was going to be a Radio 2 cruise. Slightly disappointed. Maybe we can work on that for next year.
Yes, well, there actually used to be, because Mrs. Mayo used to produce it and actually was on a cruise with Good Morning Sunday listeners for 2 weeks.
Wow.
True. I think we should bring that back.
Something to aim for next year.
Yes, well, so anyway, Confessions has to live on somehow, and I'm sure you miss me very much.
Dreadfully. But also, obviously, I need you to get in shape before Edinburgh. We need that voice back, strong, firm, and
I know.
I need you fighting fit.
Well, I'm trying. To fill the Confessions-shaped hole in your life, here's a collection of some of our favourite stories from 2018 so far. Ones we think you'll enjoy more than life itself.
Which is something to look forward to. More importantly than anything, though, did you bring me anything back from your holiday? Because it's all about the presents when people go away.
Anyway, here's our first special Summer Confessions podcast.
You are kidding me.
Please be seated.
So tonight's tale comes from Gary, who says, Father Simon and the Confessing Mutual. As a reformed, is a winning opening sentence. As a reformed Scottish Presbyterian church minister,
here we go.
I have to admit a bit of unease at asking for forgiveness from anyone but our good Lord. But hey, if it gets me on the radio, and more, but more importantly, a bit of peace, I'll give it a try. This is the Reverend Gary here, Scottish Presbyterian church minister, asking us for forgiveness. My tale goes back long before ordination to when I was a teenager in the 80s. I was working hard for my bronze Duke of Edinburgh award in the Scouts in Ayrshire. Part of the award was demonstrating a skill of some sort or other, and I was wondering what to do. Then I remembered that a few years before, I had, despite showing absolutely no musical talent at all, had somehow managed to convince my mother that piano lessons would be a good idea. Being a good mum, she consulted friends, and a piano tutor was sourced and a trial lesson booked. I do confess to being a little shy in those days, so my mother came along with me to the first lesson, which took place in the piano teacher's house. It was there that I got my first experience of Mrs. Van Straten. She was an elderly lady, but with a strangely fine head of black hair. And when we first arrived, she was finishing off the previous lesson. As some unfortunate teenager finished her lesson, Mrs. Van Straten, who I'd come to learn was a rather strict, foreboding and sometimes fierce tutor in a kind of Miss Jean Brodie style, was playing to the gallery, basically me and my mum. As she barked instructions to this girl, she was also delighting in asking us loads of questions. More of an interrogation, really. Question number 3 on her list was, "What kind of piano do you have?" I immediately looked at my feet and my mother mumbled sheepishly, "Well, we don't actually have a piano." I thought Mrs. Van Straten was going to explode, but my mother eventually calmed her down, explaining that we would get one if I enjoyed the lessons, and that in the meantime we had an arrangement with our church that I could practice on their piano. So there you go. It's a perfect, really, really perfect answer for Mrs. Van Straten there. Despite this poor start, the rest of the lesson went well, and it was agreed that I would indeed start weekly tuition. And so began several years of terrifying and in many ways fruitless lessons as Mrs. Van Straten tried to turn a talentless musician like me into some sort of piano prodigy. I think it dawned on her pretty quickly that this lump of coal was never going to be a diamond, as I often murdered the various pieces that she gave me. However, the upside for me was that several years later, when I was looking for a skill to do for my Duke of Edinburgh award, I was able to faithfully log my lessons, which were then helping me towards meeting all the requirements for the Bronze Award. Many months later, I was beside myself with excitement when I was told that I had met all the requirements for the Bronze DOE and that I was to be presented with the badge and certificate during one of our Scout meetings on a Friday night. I was also told that I could invite some guests who had helped me in my achievement. Well, obviously my long-suffering parents, who'd put up with my intolerable practicing, would have to be invited. And as I thought who else might swell with pride as I collected my award, in a moment of graciousness, I thought about Mrs. Van Straten. So the invites were sent, and I was delighted when she told me at the next lesson that she would love to attend and that she also accepted the offer of a lift from my parents. The day arrived, and it was a cold and very wet, dark evening when I turned up at our scout hut in my perfectly ironed uniform. When the allotted time came for the guests to file from the pre-award drinks upstairs, I anxiously scanned the room to see where my parents and Mrs. Van Straten would be sitting. As I looked around, I could only see my mother sitting there. And as I caught her eye, she proceeded to shake her head in a very serious manner. In italics, that, by the way.
Wow.
How you shake your head.
Because I don't know how badly this is going to go wrong. It's not apparent yet, but
It's not.
I believe
It's
it's
one of those
going to
we
be.
think, I've
Yeah.
got no idea.
Poor old Gary.
Not knowing what she meant, I took my place in the line of other scouts awaiting their awards. After the ceremony, I rushed over to see my mum, who had then been joined by my rather flustered father, and I asked where Mrs. Van Straten was. This is the point, Father Simon, where I need to tell you that our scout hut used to be at the top of a small hill, at the end of a rather dark street. The hall had no car park, and spaces directly outside the hall were at a premium. A pavement ran up the street to the hall, but stopped there and was replaced by a grass verge that ran up the rest of the hill. You've got a map there. As I excitedly waited for the invited guests to arrive, it transpired that my father had arrived and tried to park his car as close to the hall as possible to save Mrs. Van Straten walking too far in the now torrential rain. He gallantly turned the car and parked her next to the grass verge on the same side as the hall. What he didn't notice was the rather large hole that an electricity company had dug and subsequently failed to illuminate or fence off. So as his car came to a stop, Mrs. Van Straten opened the door, stepped out, and like she's in a cartoon, fell directly into a large 6-foot-deep, pitch-dark, muddy hole. It took quite a few minutes for my father in the dark to work out where she'd gone.
Dear.
Mrs. Van Straten. Took many more minutes for him to retrieve the rather bewildered, muddy and extremely soggy piano teacher from said hole. Being rather unimpressed with the whole situation, as it were, she switched into Miss Jean Brodie mode and demanded to be taken home immediately, hence her absence from the award ceremony. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not for myself and not from Mrs. Van Straten, as she was not the most pleasant of people, but rather I seek absolution for my poor father, who not only had to retrieve a rather soggy Mrs. Van Straten from the bottom of a 6-foot muddy hole, but who, after he finally managed to bundle her back into the car, noticed that she was now bald, and he had to go back into the hole, which was, as I mentioned, dark and rather muddy,
To get the ferret. Yeah.
to get the black wig. He's never told me what Mrs. Van Straten said to him on the car journey back, but he still twitches whenever her name is mentioned. And amazingly, the subject was never brought up again at any future lessons. But Gary, think of all the sermons that you can get out of that as you preach there for the Scottish Presbyterian churches. So there you go. It was one of those stories where I got to a page and a half and still you would have had no idea where that was heading. And indeed, neither did Mrs. Van Straten know exactly where she was heading, because the answer was down a 6-foot hole. What do you say there, Bobby?
Ah, poor lady. I feel really sorry for her. You know, she's taken out on a night out, and it's actually good of her to attend one of her pupils, not one of her star pupils. I mean, I wasn't sure whether he was going to do a kind of a bit of a play for her, and she would have been embarrassed. I thought it was going in a completely different direction. We're playing the piano. You're looking at me strangely. Oh, no, is he? You know, he was.
I
He was
understand.
part of
Play.
the music.
He
It
went-
was completely honest.
He went to
Anyway.
stroke her hair passionately and oops.
Anyway, no. Anyway,
No.
I think this is no one's fault. I think it's
Yes.
an accident. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think I look outside the car if I get out of a passenger's door and look down. It's unfortunate. It's a series of unfortunate accidents, and it seems to me that, Gary, that your dad kept it a secret about her not having her own hair. Well, maybe not having much hair. You're forgiven.
A series of unfortunate events. Novice, what do you say?
So,
there?
on a point of clarification, is he a reformed Scottish Presbyterian, as he no longer is, or was it the Scottish Reformed Church?
I think it's the church that's reformed. I don't think he's. I don't
still
think he
at it.
means he's seen the error of his ways.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't decided to become
It doesn't.
agnostic or something.
I don't
Anyway.
think the theology matters too much.
Right. Now, I was
We
all
could do
right
that on
with
the
this
show tomorrow, couldn't we? The divisions in the church,
Yes.
the Protestant church in Scotland.
Oh, no, I've turned my back on
No, sorry,
them.
you don't need to comment. Go on.
When he said that she wasn't the most pleasant of people, so I don't know why Gary actually even asked her. I actually had a similar to a Mrs. Van Straten in my life, Nigel Horsfall. I had to listen for years to me plinketing the ivories, and it's not much fun listening to people who obviously got very little talent, and Gary hadn't got that in that department. He did ask her, that was nice. The grass verger on this occasion, Gary, I'm forgiving you.
You're forgiving him.
Yes,
what do you
yes,
say
I'm
then,
forgiving
Bernard?
him. Forgiving him.
I think this story basically depends on how you feel towards Mrs. Van Straten. And there will be lots who have sympathy with her. I somewhat took against her quite a bit for no reason other than probably the name. I don't know why. But and so really she should have been looking where she's going. You've got to look where you're going. We all know that's room 101. Look where you're going. So is it all her fault? Maybe not. But probably, yes, it is. So let's say definitely forgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
I think this is quite a remarkable one, really. Father Simon and the Conscious Collective, pretty much. My tale begins at the turn of the millennium, when I said my I do's and I married my husband in January. However, for the past 18 years and 5 months, we've been married. I've only lived with my husband for 14 months. For the majority of our marriage, I haven't even lived in the same county as my husband, let alone the same house. We split up in March 2001. I'm aware we should probably have got a divorce by now, but I'm an out of sight, out of mind girl, really, and I totally forget that I'm actually married. So this is promising already.
This is quite confusing. 14 months together, right?
Yeah, in 18 years they've been together for 14 months.
Okay,
So,
all
but
right.
they haven't seen each other before. I'd moved back to my small hometown in Staffordshire and had been happily living there uninterrupted for a few years. I must add that it being my hometown does mean that there are ghosts of ex-boyfriends past living within the vicinity, with one former boyfriend's family still residing in the next village along. I regularly saw said exes, let's call him Bill for ease. So his mum and dad, out and about, always had a catch-up. They told me what Bill had been up to over the years and that he'd recently remarried and moved away. I should stress that my estranged husband was still living up in West Yorkshire, although he was also from my hometown. I hadn't seen him in a while. Like I said, out of sight, out of mind. One morning I toddled off to my local supermarket, and as I walked through the door, I came face to face with my ex in the sandwich aisle.
Is this ex-husband or ex-boyfriend?
I'm on good terms with my exes, so I didn't think twice about wandering over to say hi. The subsequent conversation went something like this. Me. Hi, how you doing? Him. Great, thanks. Me. I hear you got married again. Him. Pardon? I say, I hear you got married again. Him, with a slightly confused look on his face. How could I? So I say, well, people do that now. It's not that rare. You shouldn't feel bad, He says, but I'm still married to you. Me going redder by the minute. Oh, yes, I forgot about that. Yes, Father Simon, I had actually failed to recognise my own husband.
No! Who does that?
He says, who told you I got married? So I say, trying to dig myself out of a horrible husband-shaped hole. A friend, obviously. When they said they'd heard my ex had got married, I assumed they meant you, but of course they couldn't have because, as you say, we're still married. I would have pointed that out to them had I remembered at the time. They must have meant another ex of mine. So he says, right, but you did recognise me. I am, after all, your husband. I'm sure by now, Simon, you can actually feel how much I was willing the floor to open up and save me from this hell. I couldn't actually admit that I hadn't recognised my husband. Or rather, had recognised him, but as the wrong ex. So I thought swiftly on my feet and blamed the rumour on a fictitious friend to try and save my blushes. In my defence, I was seeing him out of context. That really doesn't work, Kirsty. The last I knew, he was still living up in West Yorkshire, but no, apparently he'd moved back a few months previously. Whereas Bill, who I mistook him for, was from the next village, and so obviously more likely to be bumped into. And this is really hopeless, Kirsty, and they both had short, dark hair. Please forgive me, I've obviously never admitted this to him, and my family take great pleasure in pointing out to everyone that they know that not only have we still never sorted out a divorce, but when I bumped into my husband, I didn't even recognise him and thought he was somebody else altogether. I'm hoping he doesn't listen to Radio 2, although I do now live up in South Yorkshire, so I'm less likely to bump into him again, and if I do, he'll be out of context again. I'll probably mistake him for the window cleaner or someone like that. Well, Kirsty, I think you're in all kinds of trouble there. First of all, I just cannot see how it is possible for anyone ever not to recognise the person that they're actually still married to, even if they're out of context and even if he's just got short brown hair like millions of other men. So that's not going to wash, I don't think, but let's see what Joe makes of all that.
I'm really hoping he does listen to Radio 2, don't you?
Yes.
I mean, this is a situation, it's a whole heap of a hellish situation, to be honest with you, and you only have yourself to blame, so definitely not forgiven. You married the man, you didn't bother getting divorced from the man. He's got short brown hair, so have quite a lot of guys, but you were married to him, you were in love with him at one point, and you just, this is inexcusable, completely inexcusable.
Even if you haven't seen him for a while, he's still your husband, just because he's in a supermarket.
Not a boyfriend. No, so, totally unforgivable, but very funny.
Bobby has her head in her hands. I couldn't see because she was the other side of my computer screen.
I'm so sorry. I'm thinking about this because I agree with Joe wholeheartedly. But here's the thing, is statistically, don't most marriages end acrimoniously? Very few end when both parties are very happy. Of course, that's possible and lots of people do it, and congratulations if you do. Mm-hmm. But what's great about this is she wasn't... the only thing I can think about this, which is kind of really nothing to do with it, except I've got off on a tangent, which is if you saw your ex-husband and your emotional response was not, oh my word, there you are, I think that's generally a healthy thing.
Bobby, it's her husband. She's in the supermarket. He's in the supermarket.
I know, but she either didn't recognise him as her husband, or it was so bad she's blanked it out. And so that's why I'm being careful.
Maybe he's changed. Maybe
so much.
He looks
or
so different.
She's still in love with the bit that she's in love with. That when he walked back in again, she'd forgotten about how bad
Maybe
he was.
Maybe she's just all over the place.
So I don't know. So I've never heard of this ever. And I think on this occasion, I'm going to forgive.
Well, I'm shocked.
I'm sure. Listen, I'm shocked, but I think there's something good about it.
Bobby, how could you?
Well, the only thing she needs to do, she needs to look at her will, because I think she's married to him, and he gets the house, and him too.
The Confessions Podcast.
Now, tonight's tale comes from Katie, and this is an interesting one.
Okay. Do we need a warning?
No, you don't need a warning, but she certainly takes no prisoners. And you get a little flavour here as it starts.
Okay, go on.
Dear Father Simon and the Spares.
Oh! Boom! Here come the pain.
You know what? That's fine. I'm happy with that.
Is it? I don't think so.
If you feel that
She's
way,
not
Katie.
holding out much of prospect of getting any forgiveness at all. Before I start, I would just like to set the record straight. I know I am a terrible person, and I just hope that this confession doesn't lead to extreme changes in my life. Picture the scene, says Katie, a wet, grey 1990 Nottingham afternoon in an anonymous college, where three friends were hanging out and nonchalantly chatting away. These three particular friends happened to be me, ugly and clever, Ellen, pretty and stupid, and Ben, muscular and sharp-witted.
Ugh.
Okay?
Taken against Ben already.
Instant judgments made. We had made the tough and long travel through primary school into secondary school, now round the bend into college life, still being best chums throughout. Our parents and peers would say we were inseparable, and they were probably right. We were, if I speak for ourselves, the definition of good friendship. Anyhow, on this dull and dreary afternoon, where we sat around our favourite table playing cards, Ben stood up and left to go to the bathroom. Can I tell you something? Said Ellen, looking excited. Can I tell you something? What? I replied. I think I'm in love with Ben, she said. I think I have been for years. But do you think he likes me back? Because I've been getting all these signals from him, but I don't want to ruin our friendship, you know? Well, Father Simon, to say I was shocked to my very core was an understatement. The idea of my two best friends together was mind-boggling. Yes, I had noticed a little bit of strange behaviour between the two, but we were always weird people in that way. My mind started to, well, what happens if they break up or go and leave me on my own? All these horrible nightmarish thoughts were racing through my head so fast that all I could say was, "Oh, I see." A couple of days passed with nothing more said about the conversation. But when me and Ben were walking home through the park one day, I suddenly popped the question with the force only seen in those cheesy American crime dramas. "Do you fancy Ellen?" I said.
What crime dramas are you watching? No one ever says that in mine.
Cheesy ones.
Oh, right.
"Do you fancy Ellen?" Ben suddenly stopped, open-mouthed, and stammered, "How did you know?
Oh.
Is it really that obvious?"
Ugh.
"It's just that I like her so much."
Ugh.
Well, I was astounded. Interesting audible reaction.
This is so lovely.
Sweet
Is
and
it?
bless, sweet and bless.
Is it really? Carry on, Ben.
I was astounded. I hadn't seen this coming at all, and all of a sudden a flood of images came to mind of me alone and those two snogging. In an air of desperation, I threw caution to the wind and replied, "Yes, it is very obvious. Very obvious. I only bring it up because Ellen has started to notice, and she doesn't have a good way of telling you that she isn't...
No.
that she is not interested.
Correct.
And if you carry on,
Yep.
she might have to punch you in the face.
Correct. Well done.
I'm very sorry to tell you." "Oh," he sighed. "That's okay, I suppose." With an expression on his face which you would think you would only get if your puppy, kitten and rabbit had all met their maker at the same time. Ben quickly stopped showing any interest in Ellen, and as the weeks went on, Ellen gloomily presumed that her one true love had lost interest in her, and slowly the situation was forgotten about. This is where my real confession comes into play. The real reason why I didn't want my two besties to get together was not because I was afraid of our friendship group getting ripped apart. Much worse than that, Father Simon. Basically, I fancied the pants off Ben.
Oh.
And no one, especially pretty Ellen, was going to take him away from me. I lied and manipulated to get my own way, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. What makes this even worse is that me and Ben are now happily married. We have a child. And 28 years later, he still has no idea that I stopped him from receiving his true love all those years ago. Plus, it's bad. This is bad, and it's a wash already on the text. Not forgiven. I haven't even asked yet. Not forgiven. Not forgiven. Not forgiven. Ellen is still single and was forced to be my maid of honour and watch me and her apparent soulmate walk down the aisle 20 years ago this weekend. Happy anniversary, sweetheart.
Yeah.
If you could see the look on Bobby's face. In fact, I have to tell you, when this confession was sent to me by producer Phil, it said at the top, "I want to know what Bobby says about this one." Okay, we're about to find out. Katie says, "I beg for your penitence, but expect none, as I am perfectly happy with the man I love and who loves me. Now I forced him to." and then says, "And I would encourage anyone to do the same as me."
Oh, right. Okay.
At this point, Katie's just thinking, you know what?
Yeah, throw it all in.
I stand in no chance at all of getting any. And I have to say, in terms of sheer bald cheek and throwing all caution to the wind, this absolutely takes the biscuit. Katie would like, well, I don't know whether she cares, but anyway, Bobby with her serious face on says this.
Ask Matt first.
Okay.
I'm trying to construct a sentence.
Okay.
Well,
this is good. Let's.
For radio.
I get the feeling that most people are going to come out against Katie. So here's going to be the defence of Katie. Number one, Ben with his muscles and his sharp mind. Fooling no one, Ben. We all know, dead inside. Whereas the friend really good looking, using her boom shakalak wiles, all that kind of stuff. What's wrong with Katie using her mind? Yeah? Think about it. Correct. So for that reason, I am gonna forgive, just because of Ben with his.
Matt, they wanted to get together.
Yeah,
she stopped them.
Well,
then said,
"Yeah, but do you know what?
Be our maid of honour."
Maybe love would have found a way, but it didn't, did it? No. So turns out the other two were destined for each other. Unlucky, Ben. So yeah, forgiven.
So now Bobby, I don't know if Bobby's composed herself.
I have very little to say, obviously, Katie. I mean, I didn't care you called me a spare. I can live with that. That's fine. That's all right. However...
It's not really.
Well, no, it is, really. That's not a bother.
No.
What is a bother is the fact that you've been second choice for 22 years.
Ooh,
So, you know,
yes.
good luck with
Second
that.
choice, Katie. That's how she's known.
Second choice, Katie. And, you know, he loves you, but he's always pining after her, and you're still friends. So every time
And
he
you know
sees
that
her...
hollow look behind his eyes?
Yep, that's Ellen. His love for Ellen. So good luck with that, Katie. Hope that works out for you.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
The Confessions Podcast.
And it's time for another confession. If you miss any, don't forget the podcast. You can subscribe and everything will be there and delivered to your device every Friday round about lunchtime. This one comes from A. It's just a capital letter A. So clearly a degree of anonymity. I'm not quite sure why. And this is the kind of confession that made me think of Rebecca Pike.
Oh, yes.
Because if Rebecca was here, I'd get halfway through and she would be rolling her eyes and tutting.
Not because it's classy and sophisticated, well-educated.
My guess is
and
it's
lovely.
not.
I don't think you'd put this
okay, that's-
confession
okay.
in that particular category. No. Anyway, A, thank you very much for this. Good afternoon, Father Simon. Good afternoon, A. The incident I wish to confess to occurred on a balmy summer's evening in 2002, when our parents were due to join our usual routine of walking the dog. Just so happened that evening that some close friends had popped in, so it was decided that the men in the party would stay at home and discuss important sporting matters. Isn't it odd that every man seems to be able to manage their given football team better than the current incumbent?
Yep.
How is that possible? Anyway, so with a flurry of barking, shoes going on, and a bottleneck of bodies in the hallway, we all set off. Oh, it's a bit chilly, says Grandma, as soon as we'd emerged from the house. Don't worry, Mum, you can borrow one of my jackets, says I, and I went back to grab a coat for her. Now, I should probably point out at this juncture that the whole family's sense of humour could be described as basically lavatorial, which hopefully excuses what comes next. Rebecca rolls her eyes at this point.
Okay.
On the way out of the door, I spotted my son's, how shall I say, flatulence machine lying on the table. And without another thought, I slipped the gadget into the pocket of the jacket I was lending to my mother.
This is already superb.
The grandmother of the clan. But I kept hold of the device's remote control for myself. Here you go, Mum, this will keep you warm, I said, and kindly voice, and we headed off to the local wildlife reserve. So much fun. As we walked across a Rebecca's rolling her eyes.
Yeah.
As we walked across a wooden walkway, I spotted a lone gentleman making his way towards us, and sensing an opportunity, I encouraged everyone else to walk faster, leaving Grandma lagging behind. Cheer up, Grandma! We must have been 30 metres ahead and approaching a wooded area when I looked back to see both the gentleman and Grandma approaching a stile from opposite directions.
Keep going.
I was right to describe this chap as being a gentleman, as he was patiently waiting for Grandma to negotiate the style. But it's not that funny. But as her left leg was raised, and she was about to shift her weight over the stile, I realised that this was my moment, and not even knowing if the flatulence machine's remote would work from so far away, I pressed the big red button. Even if the remote did work, would we even be able to hear it from so far away? How would we know? Well, I needn't have worried, as it became apparent pretty quickly that something had occurred. As we looked on from behind the trees, the scene before us seemed to freeze, with Grandma's leg abruptly stopped mid-air, and the unsuspecting gentleman's head shooting up to look at her directly in the eye. The tension seemed to have frozen everyone in place, and looking back, I think we might still have been there had it not been for the twitch on my finger. You see, I involuntarily pressed the remote again, which seemed to galvanise everyone into action. Grandma started protesting and gesticulating wildly in our direction, which had the direct effect of some of us losing the use of our legs from laughing, while other members of the family had gone a funny puce colour and were having trouble breathing. Never in my wildest imagination did I think the scene would unfold so spectacularly, and we were still in a condition of heightened amusement when Grandma finally came bowling up to us. She then recounted the conversation with the gentleman, explaining that he'd actually jumped backwards on hearing the second noise. "No, no," Grandma had shouted at the man as he landed back on his feet. "It's a machine." "Oh, don't worry, madam," he'd apparently replied. "It's perfectly natural."
Yes, it is.
"No, it's them," she screamed. "It's all right, madam, we all do it," said the gentleman. Anyway, we were still recovering when, to add insult to injury, I pressed the button again, made Grandma jump, and it sent us back into apocalyptic laughter. Father Simon, I need forgiveness for embarrassing the gentleman, humiliating my mum, and possibly being a bad influence on my two children as they have grown up to enjoy these jokes. It wouldn't surprise me if they didn't have a few confessions of their own. You see, basically, it's the Beano in a confession. I mean, it's a straightforward comic extract, this tale. It's just that it was the juxtaposition of the gentleman with the style and the raised leg. Perfect timing from A. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Bottom burps in the mist, eh? It's fantastic. I didn't know you could get a machine. I know the whoopee cushion. I've bought several whoopee cushions. I've got loads at home. They're fantastic. I didn't know the machine existed, so I'm off to buy one as soon as I can. What I love about this is the kind of choreography that's involved, the kind of timing, everything absolutely perfect. So it sounds like the grandma is actually quite kind of got a great sense of humour. I don't think you really embarrassed her. I mean, she went with it and she loved it. So in the fact that the old man, I don't think was embarrassed, and he probably had a good chuckle himself and told the story when he got home. I don't think you humiliated your grandma. You're forgiven for that. And as for being a bad influence on your children, it is your obligation to be a bad influence this way. Yeah. So
like
forgiven.
I like the idea of Grandma pointing at the wood saying it's them, and they're all hiding behind trees, and he's going, yeah, okay, it's fine.
Whatever.
Brother Matthew.
I love this. Obviously, this has brightened my day no end. And who'd have thought when you get those remote machines? Because I don't think we haven't got one of them, but oh my goodness, I wish I did. And I didn't know they worked from that far away. Oh, the opportunities are endless. But there is none better than when somebody has their leg raised trying to get over a stile.
With a gentleman on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Oh, my Lord. Yes, definitely forgiven. Well done.
Don't worry, madam, it's perfectly natural.
Yes, happens to the best of us.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight's comes from Mark. Thank you, Mark. Simon, Joe and Bobby. I'm writing, by the way, this is just a prediction from me. No forgiveness.
Neither of us, really?
That's a challenge.
I'm writing to beg forgiveness for a prank that went drastically wrong around the summer of 2007. My wife is without doubt the biggest Harry Potter fan and has read the books on many occasions. And on the eve of the release of Deathly Hallows Part 2, my wife, myself and her two work friends from the store, where they all work, were out enjoying a few drinks. We'll call them Rosie and Jim. Well, Rosie and Jim were also a couple, and after several shandies, Jim told us he always used to play pranks on Rosie. Rosie is also a big reader, with Stephen King being her favourite author. So Jim thought it would be absolutely hilarious if he ripped out the back pages of Rosie's latest Stephen King novel when she wasn't looking. I mean, already, pranks to Jim, that's so unfunny. Anyway, as Jim told the story, I could see Rosie's face getting redder and redder, and my wife quickly voiced her disapproval. It was at this point the conversation took a bit of a dip, and not long after that we called it a night. My wife was up at 6 a.m, after all, to get the new Harry Potter book. The next morning came and my wife was as excited as I've ever seen her, bouncing around like a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. She dragged me along to the bookstore with her, and much to her delight, she was one of the first there. The smile was soon wiped off her face, though, when she saw the person at the till. It was old Jim, and as she took the book, she gave him what could only be described as a death stare. Anyway, we were soon back home, and my wife was completely engrossed in the book, reading 10 pages at a time, then going back and rereading the same 10 pages again so she didn't miss anything. She was so into this book that she soon forgot she had a family, and she forgot she had any friends. This book was her entire world. I think Mark's a little resentful. Around a week into the book, we had a party to go to, which I'd been looking forward to for some time, given that it was with friends and we hadn't seen them for ages. Well, we got there and all was going swimmingly, but soon my darling wife vanished into thin air, leaving the other couples and myself wondering, where on earth has she gone? After a couple of minutes of searching, I found her in the tree house out the back, reading the book, which by now was the only thing that seemed to matter to her. This caused an argument that was so bad we left the party and went home again. My darling wife went straight to bed and I was left on my own downstairs with a rather fantastic bottle of wine all to myself. I know you can tell where this is going. After several large glasses, I decided to cook myself some late supper, but as I walked into the kitchen, there on the dining table was the book. The Harry Potter book. I actually couldn't take my eyes off it, thinking, "You've ruined everything, you have, you book." And the more I stared, the more my hate for this book overcame me. A little devil on my shoulder reminded me of Jim's prank. I sort of danced over to the book and gave it one last stare before picking it up, opening it, and I can barely read these words, tearing out the last 10 pages of the last ever Harry Potter book. This filled me with the kind of joy and happiness I hadn't felt for a couple of weeks, says sad Mark, and I went to bed with a spring in my step. The next morning, my wife woke up and was a new woman. She'd obviously given a lot of thought to the strong words I'd used in our argument. She even cooked me breakfast, told me she loved me and apologised for the neglect she'd shown in previous weeks. A week or so had passed when one night my wife said to me, "Not long now and the book is finished." I kissed her on the head and went to bed early, leaving her downstairs with a bottle of wine and the book. There's a lot of wine in this story. I set my alarm and nodded off to what was a pleasant sleep, right up until the moment that I was awoken by, in capital letters, a scream from downstairs. I ran down thinking my darling wife was being attacked or had had an accident. When I got there, she was crying and she could barely speak. "What's wrong?" I asked, but only a mumbling noise came from her mouth. I gave her a glass of water. She composed herself. Then this look of pure evil on her face with a glare like I had never seen. She shouted at me, "The back pages have gone from my book! Who could have done this?" As the consequences of my foolish actions hit home and panic set in, I said what had to be said. "Well, Jim must have done it," I said, obviously. "He did the same thing to Rosie, and it was him who sold you the book, if you remember, so that's the only logical explanation." At this point, my wife looked at me with a glare like I had never seen, and for a brief moment I even thought I saw horns growing on either side of her head. "I want to see him. Fetch the car. We're going to work right now to get him." I couldn't believe the hole I dug myself, but I didn't argue, and before long we were at the shop. My wife burst through the doors, went straight up to Jim and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "What have you bloomin' well done?" Jim looked blankly, but my wife continued, "You know what you've done, you evil man? The same as you did to Rosie's book, except mine's a limited edition and signed by the cast of the films." The enormity of what I'd done hit me like a ton of bricks as my wife broke down in tears. And then, to make matters worse, Rosie got in on the act. "Jim," she said, "how could you do this? You horrid man, you're in the spare room tonight."
Good impression.
Thank you very much. I got a little carried away. Poor Jim tried to protest his innocence, but no one was listening because he'd done it before. He had previous. And before long, I took my sobbing wife home as a shop full of customers gave Jim the evil eye. Well, it's now been over 10 years, and I'm ashamed to admit I still haven't revealed the truth until now. And my wife has never uttered another word to Jim since then.
No way.
In 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
I therefore seek forgiveness for being such a wimp and for committing such a heinous act in the first place. Well, that's why I said no forgiveness on a whole bunch of levels. First of all, you never ever desecrate a book like that. How callous and evil and rotten and terrible. And your wife thinks it's Jim that's done it, and you haven't spoken for 10 years. Oh dear, Mark, I think the wrath of the nation is coming your way via Joe Wiley, first of all.
Not no way, not no how. This is never ever going to be forgiven on any level whatsoever. The self-pity, though, in the way this was written, and the way he was sarcastically saying "my darling wife" all the way through. I mean, just ridiculous. And for poor Jim, in fact, he ruined the whole relationship. I can relate to this because I'm a massive Harry Potter fan myself, and with this book we went on holiday, and I was accused also of neglecting my entire family. And I remember being in the swimming pool and reading the last 5, 6, 7 pages and just sobbing. My tears were just kind of pouring into the pool. Yeah,
we went to the day after this one came out. My family went away with 4 other families, and 3/4 of us had exactly the same book, and the deal was if anyone gives anything away, you have to carry the other person's luggage. That's the deal. That's
it's a really big deal. So no way
deal.
Could you be forgiven, Mark.
Yes, exactly.
Well, my confession is I've never seen or read Harry Potter, so there you go. So I don't have a vested interest. However, I would say I kind of understand Mark's resentment when they're at the party. You're giving me the you've never read a Harry Potter
Bobby.
book. I understand how Mark felt, though. You know, she's at a party. That's not very fair, disappearing with your book.
Yeah, but how fantastic to retreat to a treehouse when there's a party going on and it's just just you and a Harry Potter book in a treehouse.
But Mark's left
And
at the
vodka.
party on his own. That's what's
Oh,
not fair.
poor
So
Mark.
I kind of understand where he's going from. Having said that, he had plenty of chances when she woke up in the morning and said, "Look, the error of my ways." She could have given he could have given the pages back then. But you're right. The biggest problem is the fact that he blames someone else, and that friendship has been ruined for 10 years. Mark, I'd be surprised if you're still married after this.
So
really.
what's going to happen now?
Yeah, surely there's a
very good
second part
question.
to this. So let us know.
He vandalised the book, and his mate Jim vandalised the book, so he doesn't get any sympathy either.
But
Anyway.
not this book.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that's it for the first of 3 special Summer Confessions podcasts. I'm back off on my holidays now, and I'm going to return again next Friday for the special edition podcast number 2, and I'll bring something for you.
Yeah, you better. It's terribly good of you to come back, though, just to keep jetting backwards and forwards. So we appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Obviously, I'll be back on the show from 5 o'clock on Monday with added Ricky Wilson. And yeah, looking forward to my presents when it arrives.
Okay, I'm working on it.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.